Well, this is really your discussion, panel members. This is can Ireland realistically achieve world-class excellence in healthcare? And clearly there are a number of aspects to what we might mean by this. So perhaps I might invite Philip to kick us off with perhaps some views about what he understands by achieving world-class excellence in healthcare for Ireland.
Perfect. Thanks very much, James. I suppose from my perspective, I'm going to start off with the dirty topic of politics, because that's my background and that's where we are. A few observations on the way here. I was thinking of what it means to be excellent in any one industry. And I think the question that's posed today, I think we're starting from the wrong position. And I'm being brutally honest. The question says, can Ireland realistically achieve? To my mind, we should be in a space where we're saying when, not can. And I say that for a few good points. I think we're capable in many respects to achieve excellence in healthcare, providing that we redefine what excellence means for us, what it means for the staff in the healthcare sector. But behind all of that is the political reality. And my boss used to say when he was in the Department of Health that people want a world-class healthcare. But what they don't want is their local hospital to close in order to open up a state-of-the-art hospital 20, 30 kilometres down the road. So the question that we're posing is, do we want a world-class health centre, hospital that's further away from us, or do we want a second-rate hospital that's closer to our homes? And that's the political reality that I find myself in and that politicians find ourselves in, because as you can imagine from the media, the point at which you go to close down a local hospital, you get the backlash and you can't do it. So politics plays into this to no end, and it's something that we've got to be very conscious of. Another thing, and my kind of final opening point is, if we want to achieve a world-class healthcare system, a point that was raised to me was, who cares for the carers? In getting a world-class health system, we're going to demand so much from our doctors, our nurse, our support staff, but who looks after those people in achieving world-class healthcare? So they're my opening points. You might agree or disagree with them, but I think politics plays a huge part in that. And how we get over that, I don't think we'll fully ever grasp it, so for what it's worth.
Thank you. Perhaps I could invite June to comment at this point. Do you have some observations on that?
I think that the solutions in terms of improving healthcare, and I suppose it's not just improved healthcare services, but healthcare status in Ireland, goes beyond just the responsibility of healthcare services in general. There is a big role, and I was talking to a colleague yesterday who spoke about the importance of the role that schools play in promoting health, that county councils play in promoting health. I drove on my way here today. I got lost en route and ended up in a more deprived part of Dublin City, and I reflected deeply on, I suppose, the issues which affect that community, and they're not purely access to healthcare services. It's about jobs, it's about employment, it's about access to equal resources like other parts of the country would have that benefit and privilege too. So I think in terms of looking at healthcare, the debate is outside the strictly the healthcare services. It's about looking at the role of all stakeholders play. So that would be my first point. In terms of your point around accessing healthcare and accessible health services, coming from the west of Ireland, I can tell you that it's not just about whether the service is 20 miles away or 50 miles away. It's about accessible routes and roads. If you're coming from Clifton to Galway or from Kilkee to County Clare or Limerick, it's about how can you get there. And I think people are used to having to travel big distances to access services, especially when they live on the fringes. But having accessible routes and transport to get to those services is actually more important. So it's not just about the physical building itself. I think fairness and ethical decision-making when it comes to politics is really critical, and that we're transparent around that. So this 10-year plan that's going to be outside of the, responsibility of political parties, which sets out in plain English what will meet the needs of the population, their requirements, and I suppose, focuses on three specific things: patients' needs right across the country, improving their experience, which will be informed now by this partnership work that HICWA and the Department of Health and the HSE are working on, and ultimately looks at outcomes as well. So needs, experience and outcome are critical in terms of informing that 10-year plan.
Thank you. Barry, would you like to say a few words on that, please?
Very interesting. I mean, I think the idea of a world-class healthcare system, it's a bit like buying a new smartphone or having a laptop. What's world-class today is already out of date by tomorrow. And that gentleman who presented earlier about e-health, fantastic. The technology to do that's been around for quite a few years now. The problem is that you've got a healthcare infrastructure of people who've been beaten to death. They've had everything taken off them. They can't take their eye off the ball. They can't take their finger off the patient's blood vessel to implement anything. And it's not about the technology, it's about the process, changing the processes. And that's really what will drive it. You need the technology to change the process and the medical technology. So I think it's about a completely different focus. And to be honest, having a healthcare system that's now driven by a 28-year-old man, I have to question that, what he knows about driving the healthcare system. And I mean, it's fine for him to be an advocate, but like, I mean, I didn't know which end of me was up when I was 20 years of age, and I don't care how much smarter he is than me. I mean, and we're back into this rhetoric and loop of this. He's coming in to be the superhero. We're getting the rhetoric, and then we're going to have all the problems back again. We're talking about the trolleys. We're a bit hung up on trolleys, if you don't mind me saying so, because it's problems back up the line that need to be sorted out. But we have to accept that the government has taken so much out of the healthcare system in terms of resources and people. We've really got to balance that back up a little bit before we can even start to look at improving it. I don't know if we really want a world-class, because in fact, to have a world-class healthcare system, you need to have sicker people, because that's how you develop a world-class system. And I think what you're advocating is really the idea of improving health and keeping people out of the healthcare system, which is good. But that's probably a longer-term objective. And we've got to deal with a lot of the problems that we have here, getting the workload out of the emergency departments and whatever. But we really need to get back to base. I think we need a strategist to drive it, long-term committed to it. And I think the other issue, if you've seen the issue in the paper last week, was around medical devices. Most of them are more than 10 years old and they need to be thrown out and replaced. What have you got in your life in terms of technology that's 10 years old? You may have an old car, but you already know its limits, and you certainly wouldn't be driving it up and down the country every day of the week. And that's what the healthcare system has to deal with. So I think we've got to get real here, and there's of course there's investment. Of course it has to be done the right way. But to me, it's key is processes, improving our processes, and that's a bigger discussion, if you like.
Thank you very much. Yes, that certainly is a bigger discussion, and certainly investment in new technologies does form part of that. So perhaps I could just ask Damien to say a few words about his thoughts on technology and maybe some of its limitations and risks.
Thank you. So I concur with my colleagues here in terms of investment in education, investment in infrastructure is vital here. There's no point in having our health services too far away from the people. But the angle that I see is that technology is a core play here. When you walk around the room today and you see all these fantastic innovative companies that are bringing cutting-edge Internet of Things type strategies to the front, these strategies and these new applications are effectively useless if we don't build on the core infrastructure, what I see being the broadband service to supply into these hospitals and healthcare services. We see the current Minister for Communications, Dennis Naughton, has kicked the can again in terms of the National Broadband Plan, pushing it out to 2022. And at that stage, all our international competitors, should I say, will have surpassed us in the world of IoT and healthcare. And at that stage, 2022, finally our Minister for Health may have come of age by the time we're prepared to engage and embrace these new technologies. So without joined up thinking between health, communications, I think we're not ready for world-class health service, and we're not ready to embrace technology changes that our other international peers are embracing.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can ask Tracy to say a few words about what she thinks the implications for a world-class healthcare system are for information governance.
Well, I would say I would support most of what was being said. We do need to get the ecosystem correct, of course, but we need the core, and who's at the core of this? It's our patient. And the patient hasn't been mentioned here yet, and we need to go and ask patients what do they want, what will make it work for them in a most efficient, effective way. And I do believe the patient experience survey will help hugely in that. And the findings from that, while there'll only be a baseline and a national baseline, they'll give us a way that we'll understand better how they want to use the systems that we have in place and what kind of transport that they would prefer that would be in place, or are they happy to go online and do it otherwise? Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes back to the point really about the services and the future services being patient-led, and accessing services in a way that actually works for the patient.
Exactly, yeah. I think patients should be front and centre. We've seen it in some groups around the country that they have them in every group that is making decisions, and it makes a huge difference. And I notice in our own groups for the patient experience survey programme, we have them in the advisory groups, we have them in the steering groups, and it gives a complete different look and feel to everything, and it's hugely beneficial. And I would highly recommend it to everybody in this room. If you're bringing innovative ideas to the healthcare world, have your patients and hear their point of view. Yeah.
Thank you. Owen, perhaps I can ask you to speak about this from your perspective, designing, obviously the design of clinical premises, smart buildings, the era of BIM, all feeds into this kind of discussion quite nicely, I think.
I'm coming from a different perspective. I'm an architect who designs healthcare buildings. And every time we open a new hospital, it's always described as world class. And you'd wonder, what does that term mean? The new National Children's Hospital is described as world class, but in fact, it's a 350-bed regional hospital that will be referring its most difficult cases to Great Ormond Street in London. So we don't have the patient population in Ireland to have centres of excellence of what would be truly world class. And this goes back to urban and regional planning in Ireland. Our population density here is something like 65 people per square kilometre. In the UK, or in England and Wales, I think that density is 450 people per square kilometre. So you can see how that very sparsely populated countryside leads to huge problems, which were referred to earlier in politics, in roads, in distances and times to services. It also then impinges on how you plan and deliver services. Now in the UK, maternity services, the normal length of stay for a mother after birth, I think, is 10 to 12 hours. In Ireland, it's 2 to 3 days. So we have perhaps 2 to 3 times the number of beds in our maternity hospitals than you would have in the UK for a similar cohort of patients. However, in the UK, they have far better services in the community, and they can be provided because of the density of population, because the nurses and midwives can access the patients very efficiently. That isn't possible here, so it leads to the kind of service that we have. I think HICWA have been shining a light on the dark recesses of the Irish healthcare system and are lifting the standards dramatically in all the areas. One other quick point, I'm involved in a disability charity. There are 41 organisations providing services for people with physical disabilities. And there's the Disability Federation of Ireland, I think, have something like 170 members. So there's a whole raft of small organisations set up to look after people who have a particular need and a particular shortage of some service. Those organisations just operate randomly and separately. Amalgamation is being promoted very much now by the HSE, and we're involved in some of that work with them, but you can see how there can be huge efficiencies and improvements in service if there is streamlining.
June, would you like to make some further points on that?
I agree with the importance of amalgamation and people working together in partnership more frequently, because it's when people come in together and brainstorm what the solutions can be and really listen and bring patients into the room and listen to what those solutions are, then you get that, I suppose, richness of ideas, and you break down the barriers and reduce the silos. And I think that that's the way forward for us to be a little bit more altruistic, put our standpoints on the table, and always put the patient at the centre of decision making and have more ethical decision making in terms of progressing those ideas. And in terms of staff, you know, we're going to be working with staff now in terms of identifying the solutions that come out of the survey programme. But it's about doing it in a non-threatening way, doing it in a way which promotes a culture of learning as opposed to a culture of fear, creating a win-win in the situation for staff as well, looking at how you can support them to do it in a more altruistic way. So when we go out to the front line, I always try to see what's the win-win for you, how can you be brought in, how can you identify the solutions, own it, and reduce the competitive cultures that exist across the system and that exist between organisations, because it's that unhealthy competitiveness between organisations, external and internal, and silos within the organisations that break down communication and make it harder for people to work together. So this project that we're involved in, HIC with the Department of Health and HSE, is particularly fruitful from that perspective, because it's about a partnership, it's about working together, and having the patients at the table there as well is very important.
Yeah. Barry, does that chime with your views on the...
Yeah, and you're right to mention the patient. I mean, in terms of process, the patient is king. You start with the patient, absolutely. But just back to the comment about the analogy of the UK, why don't you do an analogy of a country that's more appropriate, like a Scandinavian country like Denmark, which is about the same size of Ireland and has a much better infrastructure. I've had the pleasure of walking into an ED department there, and actually it's like a ghost town. Everything works smoothly and everything. So there's definitely models we can use. But we also know that nobody in the world has a world-class system that's perfect. Everywhere has its ups and downs. And we see what's happening in America now, where Trump is trying to take apart Obamacare. So everybody's there's challenges everywhere. We just got to look at the best one. But don't forget, we actually have world-class doctors in this country. It's a kind of, I don't know if it's more by accident than anything else, because an awful lot of doctors, to develop themselves, had to go abroad. Most of them have advanced education in the UK or America or further afield in Europe. So when a doctor actually gets to you at the bedside, you can be pretty damn sure you've got a world-class doctor or certainly consultant-led team that's world-class. It's what we're building around them, and by that I don't mean to put them on a pedestal, because I think that's what we do as well. They should be, in terms of dealing and managing and developing processes, they need to engage with everyone else. So it can't be one setup for the doctor and one setup for everyone else. But we do have very high quality of clinician in this country, in Ireland. That isn't an issue.
Yeah, I think it's very important to accentuate the positive in this particular discussion, because it's very easy to identify problems without actually focusing on what's actually working very well here.
So I guess from what I take from today is that we have elements of world class out there, from the beautiful hospitals that the architects are designing, from the physical buildings to the training and education side in our schools, to the nursing, that we need to include the patients at the center of all discussion pieces. But what I also take from this is there's a serious lack of joined up thinking here. That education doesn't speak with communications, that communication doesn't speak with the planning side of the world, and that the healthcare section seems to be on an island somewhere else. So a lack of joined up thinking, and I guess I'll raise this to my colleague here on my left, that we look towards government to provide that joined up thinking, and it's up to you guys to create the task force to bring together and harness the energy that we have here and harness the world-class leaders that we have and bring a world-class health service that the people are demanding.
Philip, you're in the hot seat there.
Yeah, that's no problem. Every day of the week I'm in the hot seat. I think the points that have been raised, for me, I would agree with most of them. I think putting the patient at the centre is key. What I think we're not good at in Ireland is selling the parts of the healthcare system that are working well. When we were in health, there was so much good stuff taking place that we tried so much to celebrate it, to get it out there, but it never flew, it never caught, because there was so much other stuff in the background that would have more media attention that we couldn't push it out there. So I think it's up to us as government, yes, to sell those good things, to say that there are good people doing great things every day of the week, some that don't want the recognition, but it's up to us to recognise that. Back to the point about joint-up thinking, I had a conversation yesterday with a colleague of mine about that very thing about joint-up thinking, because I'm now in the Department of Social Protection, that we need to talk to other agencies. To my mind, what's happening is people, to some extent, are talking, but they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know how to harness what they're talking about. They will talk, but then what follows on from that? They're in a process, the task force, the groups, but it's how you support that, and it's how, as politicians, we support those to give those the political impetus. I fully agree that we, as government, as politicians, need to set up the appropriate frameworks. But with that, you have to have concrete outcomes to it, and you have to give people a way forward with these things. And I think it's important that we do so. But again, it's difficult.
Yeah. June, would you like to come back on any other points?
I think it's great to get people talking, but it's about getting the right people talking, and it's about getting decision makers talking, because you can have, we'll have lots of networking events here, but in these organisations, there are a lot of hierarchical structures that you have to sort of weave your way through in order to get a decision maker, who will make that decision. And I recognise that in terms of my own role a long time ago, and I decided to pitch myself in a place where I had the king's ear and could get reporting directly to somebody who was basically to the king's ear. And the benefit of that was that I could get decisions over the line very quickly. So in these organisations, the hierarchical structures very often prohibit really good decisions getting over the line. So that's something that we need to think about in terms of progressing joined up thinking, joined up people talking, and getting really innovative solutions going forward. And I think a lot of the leadership gurus now would recognise that it's networks of peers working together. So how do you bring these people together, and how do you get those decisions, and how do you give them the autonomy to really progress things and get heard in organisations so that they can make that change possible?
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add to that point?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is doing what the rest of the world is doing, which is implementing innovation practices that the whole world and its sister is implementing. We still haven't engaged those properly in the healthcare system. So using things like design thinking, breaking down the barriers, exactly like you said, creating networks, and getting rid of the hierarchy. But that's a cultural change as well. So that's going to be very challenging. But that's what all the successful organisations are doing.
Just come back.
Yeah, and we're on the way there, but that takes time. The health service is it's very traditional paternalistic organisation. So is education. So the old school organisations across the system. Medicine as an occupational group, nursing as an occupational group. They're very hierarchical, very traditionalistic, and it's very difficult to break down those barriers. So women in particular have that challenge in these organisations, and that's what you're faced. That's what you're up against, and it takes time. We're there, we understand it, but it takes time.
That's another question. What do you think the greatest risks are in the system to actually achieving something that you'd be comfortable in calling world class?
Some of the risks in terms of engaging patients, and not really engaging patients, but doing this survey. I mean, I believe that the way we've worked together, HICWA, the HSE, and the Department of Health on this project, has been done in such a way where we're demonstrating at every step of the way the win-win. If we went out and did it in a way which was to be portrayed as though it was around regulation, it would really raise people's fear. So the risks are always in terms of how you demonstrate and sell it. That you sell it in a way which makes people fearful, and then they're afraid to change practice. So it's about understanding the risks and then trying to mitigate them in a way where you can demonstrate the win-win and promote a learning environment. If people feel that they can make mistakes and learn from their mistakes, and take risks and learn from those risks, and that they're not going to be sort of strung up or disciplined from trying to do something which is altruistic and in the benefit of patients, will then they will be more open to those changes. So we found that in healthcare, especially in terms of admitting when a mistake was made, being open in terms of open disclosure. If people felt that they could do it and it was a safe, supportive environment, that their leaders were behind them, then they were more open to doing that. So it's all about how we support people to make those, to be open and transparent and fair.
Tracy, from the HICWA point of view, do you have any sort of observations to add to that? What do you think the risks are to creating the world-class system?
I suppose there's always going to be risks in the system, and that's why we develop the standards, and we adhere to the standards, and we inspect against the standards, and we follow up if there are risks identified. But that's kind of on a individual organisational basis. On a national basis, say for instance with the Patient Experience Project, because it is a partnership approach, because there's excellent governance in place, risks are identified, but they're managed and controlled as a result. And I think that's the thing, to have your risk management process in place, identify it, control it, and then remove it if possible, or certainly mitigate it wherever.
Yes, like any business really, take a risk as long as you understand what it is.
Yeah.
Owen, do you have any further points?
I think the biggest risk is not changing the funding model. I heard Professor John Crown speaking the other night about the funding model in healthcare, and he's very right that the acute hospitals are funded on a basis of getting whatever hundreds of million per annum from the health HSE. So that amount of money has to provide the service for the year. So whether they see 100 patients or 100,000 patients doesn't make any difference. So inefficiency and delay are built into the system by the funding system. Hence you see the 80,000 people on the waiting list. There is no way that it benefits public hospitals to see more patients. It just costs them money and drives them into bigger financial problems, which leads to risk. And just getting back to Philip's point about the joined-up thinking, you can see in the northeast corridor the effects of what is happening, that as the road between Dublin and Belfast is built, the distances between hospitals is diminishing. So if you're ill anywhere in Meath or wherever, you'll drive straight down the M1 to the Mater or Beaumont Hospital. You won't go to Dundalk or Drogheda hospitals because you'll say to yourself, well, I'll get a better outcome in the larger hospital. So spending money on roads is seen in isolation as being a vast extravagance. However, you could, by building roads in a lot of regional areas, improve the health outcomes by shortening distances and getting better access to larger centres.
And I tend to agree, maybe didn't originally agree with this idea of centres where, more elaborate medicine is carried out. I don't agree necessarily, though, that there's anybody anywhere working in a hospital that wants to do anything other than their best. I think the issue is about the hierarchical structure. The structure is wrong. We need to change it. We need to approach problems in a much more innovative way, and then drive projects that fit, identifying the challenges at their core, and then drive projects to face the challenges and deal with them. So I think it's about infrastructure that's wrong and interactions that are wrong between management, clinicians, and other groups. And we need to change that message. It's starting to happen, but it needs to happen a lot faster.
Yeah, thank you. Just slightly conscious of time. Are there any questions from the floor for any of the panel members, please? Just get your microphone.
Hello, I'm Tom Anderson, chairman of IMS. What I don't understand is, from the other perspective, there's too much talk, too much people meeting, too many committees. We deliver real solutions live on the ground, like Professor Thick was telling you at the ED. In Vincent's, we have a world-class installation where they've dramatically improved their efficiencies, their processes, and I don't understand why that isn't adopted across Ireland. If you ask Richard Corbridge why it isn't, he says it's all the people involved have to change how they think, how they work, and all the contracts they have with old companies, with old systems, and how do you get that to change? I'd love Barry to tell me why what we've delivered in Vincent's and are delivering in Limerick now isn't across the country because it's world recognised. We're in the UK doing the same thing. And Vincent, possibly on the political side, to say why that isn't being pushed through. When you see something that helps, that delivers, that creates real change, no conversations is needed. It's already there. It's proven. Professor Ryan will tell you that. And all you have to do is simply roll it out. And we're the most cost-effective IT supplier in the world. So I'd love to hear from Barry and from Vincent.
I work in a hospital, but I don't have all the answers. You have to accept that hospitals are extremely complex organizations. I don't think there's any other organization you'll come across that are that complex. They're not businesses, and they'll never be businesses. My simple analogy is if you cured 80% of the diseases in the morning, you'd spend twice as much money trying to sort out the 20% that were left. It's an endless pit. We will always put money and funding into it. There's lots of different if you want to be sneery about it, you can call them silos. Lots of different vested interests, different professional groups, and it's about getting the challenges of getting them working together. It's not about whether you've got an IC health system that'll work or not. It's about how can that be integrated into a system that's extremely complex. And that's why I think the old hierarchical system doesn't work. That might work in a traditional pharmaceutical company or a company where you just say, we've got to get the products out the door, you need to do X, Y, and Z. That's not how it works. And I think it's understanding that, engaging with that, respecting it, and at the same time getting the right people to sit around the table to make those changes happen. And that's everyone. That's the patients, the doctors, the nurses, the other healthcare professionals, probably even the porters, the executives, and possibly even the companies that engage with them, and working through processes and improving processes that way, putting the patient at the centre of the table and saying, how can we improve the lot of these patients? How can we improve the pathway of this patient? And then, of course, the e-health is a big part of that. But like, for example, in the healthcare system at the moment, ICT and medical devices are managed through two completely different systems. I mean, that's just nonsense to me, you know, because most of the medical devices run Windows software on them. So like they're just completely disconnected. So those kind of things need to be changed. But I think it's only about sitting around and discussing those that it will happen. So if you think it's frustration from the outside, imagine how frustrating it is from the inside. So you know the solutions to problems, but you can never see them being acted or not acted fast enough. So, and it is very challenging. But like you look at, I have about 35 million euro worth of medical devices in my hospital. I'm not given a budget every year of a certain percentage of that to replace them. I have to go and beg for money, and they don't tell me until halfway through the year how much I'm going to get. So there's no strategy there in medical device replacement, for example. So there's a lot of things that could be improved and made better to do that, and that's all very, very challenging. I don't want to sound too negative about our healthcare system. We actually have a very good healthcare system, and despite what people hear about on trolleys, we've got quite a good healthcare system. But we could certainly improve it an awful lot, and we could certainly improve patients' outcome, and we could certainly reduce waiting lists.
So all you have to do is install it. And the only, I don't know where the problems are. It's not money.
Yeah.
The outcomes are better. The ED is managed better.
Yeah.
The use of clinicians is better.
I slightly question you about all you have to do is install it, because what you've got to do is get all the people on board, and you've got to get them to drive behind it, and you've got to get them away from bandaging patients because they're so bloody busy and stressed to actually have time even to train on it. We can't even get people to train on new equipment, they're so busy. There's not enough nurses. There's a shortage of nurses, for example. That was driven initially by the fact that the health service in this country, their strategy on reducing staff in the healthcare was to cut the tops off all the flowers. Stop recruiting in all areas. That's not a strategy. That's no strategy at all. So whoever was unfortunate enough in an area to lose staff weren't going to get anybody back. So how can an organisation manage like that?
I understand that, but if we deliver a system in ED only, although we have full systems that they use in England for the whole hospital, if we deliver in ED, and in Vincent's they've proven, it's less nurses, less doctors, better outcomes, fewer clinicians, better for the patient, better for the doctor, better for the hospital, better for the queue, better for the waiting lists, and it's delivered. We've been through all the organisational problems. They know how to do it. Yeah. And Limerick think, well, perhaps it's a good idea. So Limerick are putting it in. Yes. And they've said to us, why don't we roll it out through the whole of Ireland? And they think, well, all the people would have to say, what about all those nice companies that currently deliver our current systems?
That certainly sounds like an interesting model that obviously lessons can be learned from, that can be replicated. But I wonder if June has some observations.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's 52 acute hospitals in Ireland, and there was a lady on before that, before us, Dr. What was her name, with the around the adaptive licensing, and she talked about the process being an iterative process. It's the very same in terms of introducing these new ideas or solutions. It's very iterative. There's a woman in England in the area of transformation and culture change, Helen Bevan, and she talks about, at one stage, almost like in a military process, you could pull down the lever and command and issue an order and make it all happen right across the system at one stage. But now you pull down the lever and people challenge you all the way. So to engage all of these organisations right across the board and make it policy that they do it in this way, actually, we need to test it, and we know it works, but it's an iterative process. It doesn't happen overnight. And a lot of these places will have their own procedures in place. And because they have their own other methods in place, or they have invested in other technologies, they're not going to change them overnight just to replace it with this new technology. So it is really, it's not as simple as...
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Could I just interrupt you just for a moment there, please? Because we're very tight on time. I just wonder if somebody else might like to ask a question.
I understand exactly what you're saying. But in Limerick, where they tore out what we already had in, put in PIMS,
yes,
then said it didn't work, and asked us to go back in and put in an ED that does work, because it works in Vincent's. So we were there. We've been through the system. Instead of adopting us fully, they decided to tear it out, put in PIMS, and it didn't work, so they asked us to go down and cure it by putting in our ED system.
Yeah.
So we're actually, the system are currently trying to drag us out of systems where we deliver better results, more cost effectively, and put in other systems.
Okay, I'm not speaking on behalf of the HSE, so what I do suggest is you speak to somebody maybe who I suppose you get to the person who is a decision maker over this, and have a conversation with them about the pros and the cons and how and the reasons for why it happens and why it doesn't happen, because I don't have those direct insights. But I think that's a worthwhile, proposal or next step to get your answers.
Thank you. Can we have one more question, please, from anybody on the floor? Sorry, we need to let other people into the conversation,
we might talk
please.
about it outside. Yes.
Thank you. Professor Thick, thank you very much.
Speaking as a clinician, and I've been one for an awfully long time, this conversation that we've heard can be heard in echoes in all the King's Fund, the Nuffield Trust, all over the UK. And to my mind, you need a balance really between understanding how you deal with the current residual disease problem that you have and looking to make sure that disease doesn't happen. Now, the only way you can really begin to do that is to have a frank and honest conversation between the politicians and the population to say, what's this worth to you? How much are you prepared to pay for it, and who's going to pay? And only at that point can you begin to effect that change. I completely agree with you about the networking aspect of leadership. The old heroic leadership stuff's gone now. Helen Bevan wrote with Paul Bates about the 1,000 change agents, which is a super paper. And undoubtedly it's going to be a complex, necessarily lengthy, but networked conversation.
Thank you. Any final comments from the panel? No? I think that's it.
Just very briefly, because I know it's lunchtime. Just back to that point about the whole population and politicians making, I suppose, the correct changes to that. I think one thing that's worked very well for the HSE and the Department of Health is Healthy Ireland. And it's when you give ownership of people's lifestyles back to the people and saying this is a choice for you to make, running that through children, into schools and into workplaces, simple, small things that improve people's lifestyles, but it has to come and be driven from the politicians. And one of the strangest things when this new government was formed was that the Minister for Health Promotion took an active interest in fixing and sorting our own health issues first in order to be an example to others, to say this can be done, but you need to take ownership of it in order for the health system in 30, 40 years' time to benefit from you making those active lifestyle decisions. But I do agree, it has to come from the top and people pushing it forward.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'd like to thank all the panel members for their participation.